Good morning, everyone. It is really good to be with you today and to spend time together. And I would like to start my talk by offering a big dose of continued gratitude, building on what Aubrey's comments were, by saying, first of all, thank you to the Duluth Chamber of Commerce and Northspan staff. You don't just put this together in even a few days. This takes months to plan, and the investment in leadership growth and all that you're doing today is tremendous. And in a time when associations are challenged to be resourced and connected and relevant, the Duluth Chamber continues to be a leader. And organizations like Northspan see that and participate in a powerful way. I also want to thank the private sponsors who have put money in today. Companies can spend their money on many things, and typically are highly pressurized to direct it to their bottom line. And their investment in today, into you today, and to me today, is about seeing that leadership is beyond just a profession. It is broad, and it requires training and intentionality. So thank you for that investment. But I also want to thank elected officials and civic leaders who took time to be here or who are aware of this, and the nonprofit and philanthropic leaders who consistently invest in human capital to strengthen our communities. The nonprofits of the greater Duluth region are amazing, and they're under great duress because of many of the things that most of you probably know and a lot that you probably don't know. And some will fall out, and others will continue on. And their investment and participation, and if you represent one of those today, significant gratitude for you in creating new and innovative ways to keep human capital at the forefront of the business community as well. And then I want to say to the stars of today's conference, if you're a professional in any career or background, and you're leaning in today as you seek to understand not just your career, but the world around you, and this bold invitation to build a city that we collectively, and not just here, but everyone else, imagines for the future, is a bold move, and it's also a contribution of your time. So thank you for being here today to help shape the future growth of the beautiful city of Duluth. And now to what brings me here today. I am so passionate about being a part of what some call collective impact that builds inclusive cities. And I have the unique opportunity to have alignment between what I care about deeply and also what I'm paid to do on the daily. To that end, I offer much gratitude to Sherman Associates, the company that I represent today and in the city of Duluth and on the board of directors of the Duluth Chamber of Commerce. Sherman Associates, if you don't know about the company, has nearly 5 decades of doing development, ownership, and management of multifamily, hospitality, and commercial projects, with a strong commitment to partnership across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. For more than 25 years, as illustrated in the images you see on the screen, Sherman has forged a unique real estate legacy here in Duluth, including the $30 million historic renovation of the North Shore Theater community impact project that is now open and run by the Duluth Playhouse for several years now, and most recently through the $47 million community impact renovation of the Duluth Armory, which I will speak about a little bit later. And my role in the company takes me across the entire state of Minnesota and even nationally to the communities that we partner with, seeking to ensure we're working on what cities want and what cities need, and supporting our teams across all of the development spectrum from pre-development, development, all of the things that go into construction, but then as important, in some cases more important, running the actual projects on a day-to-day level. Now, more about myself. If you looked at my LinkedIn account, you might be scratching your head a little bit and wondering as to how I became a commercial real estate leader later in my career trajectory. So I'll give you the shorter version. I grew up in rural Southwest Michigan. That in some ways feels very much like anywhere outstate Minnesota. Moved to Minnesota 27 years ago, but back in Michigan, my formative years were on the Ottawa County-owned dairy farm that was home to 60 adults with disabilities. My family lived on the farm in community with those residents, doing life together, 24/7, 365. And that experience marked me. It formed me, and it formed my imagination about dignity, belonging, and what it means to build a life in community with people who carry difference. I love the farm life. I was okay at sports, but strangely, I was really good at music. I loved music as a percussionist. And the photos you see on the screen are photo proof that yes, indeed, I did have hair on my head at one time in my life. And also, for those who don't know, percussion is like many things. It's, of course, drum set. But it's also mallet instruments like the marimba and the xylophone and other percussion instruments like timpani. And yes, even the triangle that was mocked in a 2017 Geico car insurance commercial. And you may have seen this and gone, what is that about? Well, friends, I went to a really incredible music conservatory, and yes, you had to learn triangle technique. You know, it didn't take a long time to learn that triangle technique, but it was one of like 100 skills you had to learn as a percussionist, which began my understanding of, oh, I need to be a Swiss Army knife. And that's the role of professional percussionists in the orchestra or in the studio or wherever. Well, my musical journey led me from milking cows on a dairy farm and social impact with those who we shared community with to the Interlochen Arts Academy in northern Michigan, then to the Eastman School of Music in New York, where I met an opera and musical theater singer who was soon to become my wife, Holly, who is here today with us and still has hung on with me for 36 years and counting. And we were married at what some considered a very precocious age of 21. Right? Very precocious. And at college, while still considering our options in the music world, Holly and I began operating a small group home when we moved back to Michigan, and now in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where my family had resettled and restructured their work with adults with disabilities to be a part of a network, a small network of group homes. And we took care of 6 men. We lived with 6 men with developmental disabilities. And my parents had a hobby farm and started a nonprofit that I was a part of. And eventually, in the mix of all of that life of doing professional music on the side, running a foster care, I also became a minister in the Protestant Christian tradition. In 1998, my family moved to Minnesota for an associate minister role in a very large Twin Cities suburban church, and also to kick off Holly's performing career in the vibrant art scenes. And in case you're wondering, I'm the blurry man at the back playing the piano or pretending to play the piano. If you look closely, you can see I still had hair at that age. So maybe it fell out at the time we started having kids and all that life began to weigh on us, and the love and the joy of growing in a family and building a wonderful career that she had in the Twin Cities for more than a decade in a very unique way. And it was in 2009, at a key moment of reflection and pivot, that I accepted the role of senior minister at First Covenant Church in downtown Minneapolis. This was a church that was nearly bankrupt, but nestled between the Hennepin Healthcare Hospital campus and the former Metrodome, now US Bank Stadium. And over the next 12 years, my vocational life went in 3 directions. One was the really interesting and challenging work of restarting that congregation. Staffing, thinking about how to be contextually helpful, to interpret the Christian faith through the lens of public good, and to reestablish a long-term model for congregational health. And to do that, I had to strike out into the community, and I began to learn how to become a business civic leader. Launching a homeless shelter in partnership with Hennepin County and local nonprofits in the church was one of those early bridges of a really unique work for which the business community said, we need to address homelessness. City Hall said, we need to address homelessness. The churches we were forming were entrepreneurial, and we said, well, we can do that, but not on our own. And so we were mentored, and we engaged and shared our building, and that development and that program continues even to today, more than 16 years later. And so I began moving into this space of the business association world that had a focus on real estate and bringing solutions to the city's urban core for nearly 8 years. And this image you see on the screen here is very telling of that phase of my life. I worked bivocationally with 4 business cards in my pocket. Now, some of you may be, who even prints business cards anymore, right? But I needed them to sort of tell a story. And some of my colleagues were like, that's a really unique card trick you've got going there. And of course, they scratched their head once again, like looking at my LinkedIn account. But overall, it told a story that had a through line. Because over time, I fell in love with real estate development, but not as a product, more as a powerful tool for shaping the built environment as a place for people. And that's what led me to come to Sherman Associates and be a part of the team that I have a privilege working with every day. And that's ultimately what grounds me in this conversation that we're having about cross-sector leadership and building cities. Now, that's the shorter version of my personal story. And I share it because it names many facets to help you understand and maybe in some small way relate to the complexity of just a human going through life, showing up to what is in front of them and trying to do their best. But what I discerned over time, through people giving me feedback, through mentors giving me wisdom, through my own inner journey of integration across business cards and jobs, is that I actually had a through line. And it was a commitment to the pursuit of human flourishing and advancing communities through the built environment and inclusive economic development strategies. Now, if you're early or even midway into your career, you might be thinking, well, if it takes like multiple jobs and 4 business cards, that sounds exhausting. I'm out. Others are like, game on, give me some more cards, give me some more opportunities, let's go. Well, I want to say to everybody across that spectrum, all of those responses and questions are valid. And why I'm so captured by a quote from Rainer Maria Rilke, a prolific poet who lived in the 20th century, who once wrote this to a younger poet, saying this to encourage them in their journey. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart. Try to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually live along some distant day into the answer. I love that quote. And that wisdom matters today because shaping cities is not for the faint at heart. And it's certainly not for the know-it-alls. The best leaders start by asking questions before moving to action. Why? Because the anthropological construct we call cities is one of the most complex living organisms in human history. Cities aren't just places. They're not just a pin on a map. They are living systems. They combine people and markets and policies and history and identity, all operating on different timelines. Authority in those constructs is fragmented, but memory is long, and change is deeply personal. This complexity isn't a flaw, it's the price of democracy, diversity, and possibility. And to be an effective leader in the mix, we have to accept that no single person or sector or organization or company owns the solution. Even our highly esteemed, underpaid, overpunished elected officials do not hold the single solution. No single perspective is sufficient. And that's why shaping cities, designing cities requires unique, civic-minded leaders, regardless of your educational background or your current professional track. And it's my hope today that you will begin, if you have not already begun, a sense of recognizing that, at least in a small way, you are leaders. Showing up makes you a leader. You may not be a great leader at some point. You can grow to be a great leader if you commit yourself to the task of leadership. And that's what I'm here today, to cultivate 6 characteristics of cross-sector leaders, business civic leaders, that unlock collaboration, accelerate change, and fuel inclusive growth across sectors in the city of Duluth as a collective effort that can be imagined together. Now, these 6 characteristics are not my original characteristics, and I offer them today as the centerpiece of the Intersector project that was assembled and hosted by the Aspen Institute's program on philanthropy and social innovation. I highly encourage you to look that up, to dig into it, and to study it. But today is my personal and professional interpretation and lived experience of that important work, that important thought leadership work. So let's dig in. The first of 6 characteristics is balanced motivation. The ability to pursue public value while remaining honest about competing incentives, resources, and power. Now, when you hear balanced motivations, you might ask, well, balanced motivations about what? Another great question. Let me give you a few examples of topics I have observed the city and the region of Duluth wrestling with that require leaders, business civic leaders, elected leaders, and others to hold multiple competing matters at once. And the topics range from housing policy to homelessness solutions, data centers, need I say more, natural resource stewardship, which is in the headlines every day, and especially in this last month, zoning and business regulation, and diversity, equity, and inclusion best practices, just to name a few. I could go on with about 50 other topics that all land in front of business civic leaders trying to build cities and have to recognize that in order to pursue public value, you have to be honest about competing incentives, resources, and power. Now, the civic business leader and balanced motivations means that you have the capacity to hold multiple goods at once without pretending they're not in tension. It's the skill of metabolizing competing ambitions, not erasing them with a naive mindset that says, well, we all want the same thing. That just isn't true. And conversely, not demonizing others at that table with a cynical mindset saying they're only in it for the money, or they are only in it to tear it all down. I remember the first time I awakened to the importance of balanced motivations and wrestled with this myself. I had a coffee with Jay Coles, a respected business civic leader and philanthropist in the Twin Cities, but really across the state in his scope. And it was at a moment when there was roughly $3 billion of redevelopment underway in less than 6 years of time on the east side of downtown near the church. And I came to that coffee just full of enthusiasm at how much was going on and how I was in the mix. A new stadium and parks and housing and hotels and restaurants and office buildings. And Jay listened, and then he quietly challenged me not to focus on only impressive buildings and materials, but to think about real estate as the means of creating places for people and for all people, not just some people. And then he said something that stayed with me. He said, Dan, you're kind of intuitively a cross-sector leader. And I'm like, what's that? Like, I had no idea what he was even saying. And then he explained that cross-sector leadership brings skills from a person, brings skills from one domain, but learns how to navigate across all the other sectors with a sense of curiosity and balance, and at their best, also with humility. And when I asked how to grow that capacity, he pointed me to the Intersector project. And that conversation and that moment became a turning point for me personally. It's where I began to understand balanced motivations as not just a theory, but as a daily practice in city building. And it became a starting point for the 6 characteristics that I'm sharing with you today. Now, this hard work of maintaining balanced motivations and converting competing ambitions into aligned commitments is hard to make concrete. So there's an analogy that I have found helpful for leaders who are seeking to balance motivations, and it's what I call the 3-ledger mindset. And it's these 3 ledgers. Public value, institutional value, and legitimacy value. The public value ledger asks the question, what improves the lived experience of all residents regardless of their position? The institutional ledger is more about like when you get a cross-sector group together to work on anything, whether it's a downtown plan or solutions for homelessness or studies on whatever, there's going to be multiple institutions and their leaders who are at the table. And the question is, well, what's true for each individual organization to sustainably participate? Budget, mission, capacity, statutory duties, and sometimes people and organizations don't have the money, need to be supported to stay at the table. And that's why that question can be very important. And then there's the legitimacy ledger. Who gets to define success? And who experiences the consequences if it goes wrong? Is it only the powerful? Is it only the vulnerable? Or is it somehow everybody working together? And that's where trust, accountability, equity, and transparency are needing to be aligned. And I think the key here is that in this space of ledgers, balanced motivations means refusing to cook the books, so to speak, on any ledger. You don't sacrifice public value for institutional convenience, nor do you demand public outcomes while ignoring real constraints that keep partners in the game. This is really hard work. And every sector brings something essential, and every sector also has a shadow. So balanced motivations is about staying honest about both of that. And I need to also highlight, it doesn't eliminate you as an individual. It doesn't eliminate even you and the company or the organization or the nonprofit or whatever that brings you to that table. Like that's in the space. However, in the space of balanced motivations, that commitment to not cooking the books ultimately civilizes the competing interests. It begins to aim it collectively, and we're all sort of bound to public commitment. Okay, that was a lot of time on that. I'm going to move a little more quickly through some of the next ones. The second characteristic of cross-sector leadership is transferable skills. Hard, practical skills that allow leaders to contribute meaningfully across different sectors. Now, in cross-sector leadership, transferable skills, it's not just personality skills or strengths finders or other types of psychological constructs of who you are and how you see the world. It's hard skills, honed over time through such vehicles as formal education or just as your professional work has grown. So things like finance. Maybe you're a good convener, you're a stakeholder management professional, maybe you're a communications expert, project planning, engineering, architectural design, data analysis, infrastructure, fundraising, governance. I mean, these are the types of hard skills that actually can connect across boundaries. And here's the encouragement. There's nothing wasted. There have been moments where I'm like, why did I get a music degree? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And in every case, as time went on, I realized it contributed to some of the hard skills that began to stack. And so even if the job you're doing now doesn't particularly fit you, or you're going through a hard season, or your most alive space you're not getting paid for, well, all of that can become fuel for earned wisdom and future contribution at the cross-sector table, so to speak. So I encourage you to resist this urge to diminish skills or consider anything wasted. And an example, even those who work without pay, I know bankers who coach youth sports. That's a skill if you're good at it. I know insurance professionals who chair neighborhood associations, artists who organize community volunteers. I mean, these places of unpaid work can be skill laboratories that later become central in, or at least important to, cross-sector work. One personal example. Later in life, I developed videography skills as a way to help small businesses tell their stories because they didn't have the resources for professional content. The setting was in downtown Minneapolis, where there was an overabundance of vacant retail spaces, but yet a growing number of small and emerging businesses that wanted to set up their stores in downtown. So together, with a small cross-sector coalition of real estate managers, brokers, finance, philanthropy, nonprofits, diverse proprietors, and municipal professionals, we built the Chameleon Shops, a retail accelerator initiative that helps connect diverse small and local businesses with retail space in the heart of Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis. Now, I didn't start that video work as an expert. In fact, all I started was with my phone, turning it around, learning how to do videography to tell stories. And then basically, evolving like a home workshop that adds a few new tools with every project. I invested in virtual education learning. I purchased new technical gear one piece at a time. And I was also, and this is the integrating principle here, able I was able to stack the hard skills that I had grown at different points in my life, including music production and public speaking. There's nothing like being a minister for 30 years and doing sermons and more than 100 weddings and showing up for people's lives, even at hard spaces and funeral, to learn how to communicate. And those people skills of narrative and story informed the storytelling of the small businesses. And it was firmly transferable across sectors and continues to be a meaningful contribution. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not Story North Productions and other amazing Duluth and greater Duluth area media firms who do incredible videography work. We need them. And I was also able to do this need and carry it with me and have a lot of fun doing it. And just to give you evidence, here's a 2-minute sizzle reel that I created 4 years ago. I have to say, I'm kind of exhausted looking at all of that because of the stories and the relationships and the hard work that it took to engage so many beautiful people doing beautiful things in our world. Well, the next characteristic helps you know how and where to do this important work of transferable skills. It's contextual intelligence. The ability to understand where you are before you decide what to do. And the bottom line here is that the same skill, that hard skill, improvise, learn, formally train, whatever it is, if it's applied without context, can become a wrong move. Collective impact leaders in cities, they don't care as much about where you learned it. They care whether it works in their world, their context. They care whether you can frame a strategy that people can align around or use data in the negative side without bludgeoning the conversation. And also engage stakeholders, diverse stakeholders in a way that builds trust instead of friction. And uniquely, I have learned that the hard skills of business association strategies and pro bono videography skills have been two key hard skills that have accelerated relationships and trust building and some of the important goals that cities are working on. I did it with the Chameleon Shops in downtown Minneapolis, but also when first nominated and have the privilege to join the Duluth Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. And in 2022, during the holiday season, downtown Duluth reached out to the chamber and said, hey, do you know a videographer who could maybe do some pro bono services to help us get this holiday program off the ground? and it flowed my way, and I picked it up with a sense of, wow, well, this could be a really great exploration. It's a project at that time was called Pop-Up Collab on First Street. And as you see on the screen, it was an incredible experience for me to dive into the deep texture of small business in Duluth. And in volunteering my time to get to know, in specific, these 6 and local small businesses, to get to know them personally and to share their stories on a new YouTube channel. And while, of course, it was very time consuming, and I ended up doing nights and weekends to do all the post-editing, but yet it allowed me to get a very unique glimpse into the lives of people who took risks to launch businesses, and specifically businesses and lenses of entrepreneurs of color. And their resolve and their grassroots business grit inspired me and informed my journey in an important way as I continue to volunteer in the city of Duluth. Another example, let me take you all the way to Colorado. Downtown Westminster, Colorado. It's a first-ring suburb of Denver Metro. And Sherman Associates has a regional office in this downtown, in this place that was a fully redeveloped and former regional mall area. Now, some of you may know, large regional suburban malls have been closing or under duress for the last 10 years. And we know them because if you're around them, you're like, what's going on here? There's more weeds than parking. There's empty buildings, and there's, on the business and the civic side, an eroding tax base when those malls fail. Well, at one time, the downtown Westminster Mall was a serious regional attraction, even up to 40% of the tax base. And as the city grew to be 120,000 residents, there were new nodes popping up, even new outdoor and different kinds of malls that popped up. And then, of course, all of the cities across the state of Colorado and beyond, they built their own malls, 30, 40 years ago. And so ultimately the mall died. And the city took a bold move, bought everything, even the land and the building that JCPenney currently occupies, and sought to reestablish a new grid that would make it walkable, livable, and places for people to work, live, play, and stay. Well, Sherman Associates was the first developer to jump in and to build and operate 2 large mixed-use properties called Ascent and Aspire. And those 2 properties include close to 500 apartments between the 2 projects and 60,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space. And when opened, there was incredible interest in the commercial spaces, but COVID kind of wiped that out, and as well as other small businesses in the downtown really struggled. And so when I was engaged and asked to go to Westminster and begin working with the Chamber of Commerce, they're the local chamber, everyone acknowledged there were gaps in commercial interest. In the downtown, it wasn't stalled out, but it was significantly impaired or hampered by the negative lingering impacts of COVID. So I reached out to the chamber, city leadership, and consistently they said that advancing this emerging downtown was their top priority. That was their goal. And in the spirit of leading with questions, I asked the chamber first, well, what do you need? Or how can I help? And ultimately they said, well, for one, we need new office space below market for our chamber to reset itself back into actual office space after COVID. And so I'm pleased to say Sherman Associates agreed to provide them free space in our regional office alongside our staff until they could scale up their collective impact work. And then I asked the city staff, what will help advance the downtown? And they consistently said, from the mayor to council members to professional staff, we need to find new and creative ways to tell the story of downtown, to clarify the opportunity that the city is in this for public and private partnership purposes. And so I grabbed my cameras and I ran around doing my very best to just show up. And I learned the stories of small businesses in the downtown and built another hyper-local business association alongside the chamber CEO, now called the Downtown Westminster Business Association. That's a subset but connected and a part of the local Chamber of Commerce. Now, to be clear, and to the leadership characteristic of contextual intelligence, Minneapolis, Duluth, Westminster are entirely different cities with radically divergent personalities, demographics, and considerations for city building. And in all 3 cities, friends, I'm being fully transparent. I have unwittingly kind of run in, cheery, like, let me help. And I've made false assumptions. I've committed goofs and gaffes, sometimes learning the hard way that competence without context can actually slow things down. It can slow trust down for sure. So I've come to value some context check questions that maybe you would consider using as you think about bringing your skills into a context. And here are the questions. It's sort of a mapping set of questions. One is, what is the history of the city and the relationships between the people currently leading in various sectors? Next is, among whom and where are there consistent areas of conflict? Let me give you the subtext. Who doesn't like each other and why? And then, what constraints are real, even if it's uncomfortable to acknowledge? And because I travel now to so many wonderful and beautiful cities, in many ways it's not my role to acknowledge them publicly. And I say that as a contextual question, because you may know what it is, but you may not be the right person to say it out loud. For sure not like on the city dais or at a chamber event or meeting. But ultimately be aware, show up to it, and encourage healthy dialogue about that. And then finally, who bears the risks if the collective impact idea we're planning as a group doesn't succeed as expected? It's always important to think, what happens if this doesn't work or if something goes wrong? All right. Transferable skills let you contribute. Contextual intelligence lets you contribute appropriately. And now integrated networks are what allow you to contribute collectively. This is where it starts to get a little bit more nuanced and for sure more layered. Integrated networks are credible cross-sector relationships that enable leaders to convene, collaborate, and move work forward. Now, the nuance is that integrated networks isn't about who you know, it's about who trusts one another enough to move together. You've heard this phrase a lot. Progress moves at the speed of trust. Now, in cross-sector work, authority is fragmented. No one person holds the whole solution. I've already shared that. And that's why integrated networks matter, but they're about credibility, even when you're disagreeing. And they're built when people across sectors trust your intent and your judgment, even if they disagree with you, and your ability to hold multiple interests at once. And over time, those are the kinds of relationships that become a sort of civic infrastructure. And I see this vividly in a project that Sherman has the privilege of partnering with the AAMC nonprofit here in town called the Duluth Armory Renovation Project. That's been under construction for many, many years, a passion project of the community for a couple decades, and with a major financing package coming forward for even larger construction and the full launch this summer ahead of a grand opening in late summer, early fall of 2027. Now, to me, having worked on this for 4 of those years, the Armory project represents one of the most imaginative cross-sector redevelopment projects in recent memory. And not only for Duluth. As I travel the state, there's a clear-eyed focus that this is special. It's a major redevelopment, also with an unusually complex partner structure that I'm showing on the screen here. Friends, it looks more like a star constellation or a galaxy than an org chart, but that's real. That is real in terms of how this whole thing comes together. Public, private, nonprofit, design, construction, donors, tax credits, historic tax credits, new market tax credits, all moving toward a shared future outcome. Now, in regards to this characteristic, integrated networks, I'll call out the $4.5 million grant awarded to the project from the state of Minnesota in specific. That effort alone, so that's just one piece. We're talking like a little bit less than, but close to 10% of the whole project capital stack, meant an unbelievable amount of work to be awarded. We had to garner a state level that required countless meetings and hearings and tours, consistent support from the entire Duluth intergovernmental delegation, and then wider, the greater region of state senators and representatives in times of the state capitol, and ultimately the approval of the full legislature that's comprised of 134 House representatives and 67 senators from all across the state who have their own priorities. And yet, at the same time, and I didn't even mention the governor's office, to bring this to focus for maybe on the state scale is small, but in the competitive nature of cities trying to build themselves, very important. And we got it done. And gratitude to everyone in this room and beyond who supported that. And internally, and I see some of you here, there's an ongoing set of dialogues about how this will fit into the hospitality ecosystem. So we've taken meetings with champions and leaders of organizations at such important institutions as the DEC, the Duluth Playhouse and the North Shore Theater, Zeitgeist, the Depot, Clyde Ironworks, and West Theater, and other types of cultural spaces and community spaces to learn from them and find how can we find that important slice of how this can advance all of us together, and yet at the same time recognize the challenges that they face. And so the ultimate win, we believe, is that the Armory Project will take that historic building that Northern Minnesota has cherished, and make it a new who's who for the 21st century by honoring the past while updating it for the next 100 years of its life. And there's a line that captures for me this project, what great city building the topic for today does in relation to this project. It was preservationist William J. Murtaugh who said this: at its best, preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over a mutual concern for the future. To me, that's what the Armory can represent. Engage the past in a conversation with the present over the mutual concern for the future. It's what Northern Minnesota cherishes. Updating that building will bring arts, culture, entrepreneurial development, and public gathering space. Now, for me, that's a great example of integrated and networked relationships right here, right now. But again, I want to turn back to you. You may be saying, I'm not a developer. That's nuts. You have to be crazy to tackle something like that. And I'm just getting started. I mean, what can I do to build an integrated network? Well, here's a number one pro tip that has never, ever failed me. Learn and demonstrate the art of encouragement. Encouragement. Trust is built in relationships, and encouragement is an authentic way to build relationships, even when you don't really know someone that well. And by encouragement, in example, if you're at a collective table and you don't know people, or maybe you just admire someone doing collective impact work, follow them on LinkedIn or social and react positively, either with a note or just a simple emoji of support. And if there's someone that you're connected to, maybe even send a personal note of appreciation, or even if you're not connected to them. It could be an email. It could be something publicly. I mean, leadership, this is the principle behind encouragement in the leadership space. Leadership is lonely. It's very lonely because of the risks and responsibilities that are required to be effective. And so a kind note, a timely kind note, can bring encouragement and enhance connections between you and others in a moment that matters to them. And it will lead to more durable trust that comes through shared experience and working together if you have the chance to work together. And that's the beauty of being in spaces like this. You just never know. So if you're wondering about this challenge to have an integrated network, here's some more questions to ask as a test. The integrated network test. Who would take my call if the stakes were high? Who would vouch for me across sectors? I have to say, artist, minister, business association, real estate. Every room I enter in, I have to think, well, who would vouch for me? And do I have integrity through all of those roles? Who do I help succeed? This is the magic of this. Who do I help succeed even when there's nothing in it for me? It's about outward investment that leads to relationships. Okay, integrated networks are what allow leadership to become collective. Next, a prepared mind is what allows leaders to be ready when those networks actually create opportunity. And a prepared mind is an openness to opportunity and a willingness to shape a career across sectors rather than in one lane. Now, a prepared mind is not a perfect plan. It's a posture. It's a way of moving in the world. Most of the defining opportunities of my journey didn't arrive as a clear next step. In fact, they arrived as ambiguous invitations, surprise interruptions, or responsibilities that in no way fit my resume. But they needed to get done. So I did my best to work on the things right in front of me as they're arriving that then led to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. I was on a business retreat several years ago, and a young professional took the time to look up my LinkedIn profile, bivocational cross-sector work, and said, I would love to do what you're doing as a civic business leader. What did it take to get started? I said, well, it all started by choosing to lean into a nearly bankrupt church, working outrageous hours every week, spending significant time outside of the church and what I was being paid to do to learn about the surrounding community. And then the business association work evolved out of volunteering as an unpaid board member for 5 years, sometimes up to 25 hours a week. And then when I finally was paid, I had to raise all the money for my salary across the 3 business organizations. That was actually a really funny moment. One of the boards on the east side of town was like, Dan, you're wonderful. We think you're great. You know, you're the president of this, non-paid, great. And we'd like to pay you to be our first ever executive director. Oh, we don't have any money, but if you find the money, we will pay you to be our first ever executive director. When I told that story to the young professional, he sort of blanched a little bit, and then we continued on with our conversation. And what I was demonstrating to him was that cross-sector careers, I say rarely, but I will almost say never move in a straight line. And a prepared mind isn't about predicting the future or over-calculating your risk and return, but it's about or even following a prescription for a career. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I still know enough of that. You can work for a company for 40 years and climb a corporate ladder. That is a false narrative. Probably always was, and it for sure is now. So it's about being ready for when the future shows up to you. Prepared leaders, prepared minds and leaders invest in learning and relationships and perspectives long before they know exactly how those investments will be used. They stay open to opportunities that stretch them beyond a single sector or title. And it's that readiness that allows leaders to step forward when the moment calls for it, even if the role isn't fully defined. And that's a challenge for me. My literally profile is like linear, sequential. I am like a seriously perfectionist, and I have had to deal with this duality in me my whole life who struggles with the ambiguities of this. And yet, maybe it's that artist side of me. Maybe I married an artist who challenges me, who's more of an abstract, wild thinker, to try to meld that paradox together. And a paradox is when you hold 2 truths that are different in tension and walk in the way of wisdom. Well, what does that mean for like you and for us as we kind of move down the road? Well, another set of questions. What am I learning? The prepared mind check. What am I learning that isn't required in my current job? Number 2, where am I saying yes, even if I don't feel fully qualified? What sectors or perspectives am I intentionally exposing myself to? Those are the questions. A prepared mind keeps you ready for the opportunity. And now, the final characteristic is the intellectual thread that helps keep you grounded when opportunity arrives, and even, and this is heading to my conclusion, when conflict erupts. The name and definition of intellectual thread is a sustained focus on a specific issue or discipline that gives a leader depth, coherence, and here's the important word, credibility. A cross-sector, they've said this, a cross-sector leader doesn't know everything, but they know some things deeply. And cross-sector careers can look scattered from the outside. The intellectual thread is what makes them legible to others and to yourself as you do the work of integration. Now, a quick qualifier. An intellectual thread doesn't mean you are the smartest in the room. It means you stay curious long enough to care deeply about something. I mean, it's this act of being disciplined enough to keep learning as your understanding gets tested by real life. It's where thinking, caring, and doing something all come together. This isn't just a mental construct. And I want to encourage you, it was Carl Jung, 20th century Swiss psychiatrist who founded the School of Analytical Psychology. And one of his concepts that he speaks to is in this intellectual thread space is called life task. And he understood a life task as a deep intellectual work that life demands. It's not something chosen, but something that is revealed over time. And in civic leadership, it shows up as a thread of unresolved questions about responsibility, power, and fairness, or belonging that refuse to disappear as roles change. And leadership matures when we stop treating those tensions as problems to eliminate and start treating them as the work itself. For me, in my intellectual thread, I've been able to determine, like so many others in the civic space, is human flourishing. Not as an abstract ideal, but the daily work of reshaping systems and conditions so that dignity, participation, and possibility are not reserved for only the fortunate, but for all. And at this point, I just need to give you a hard truth. Sometimes cross-sector work requires an exacting price to remain true to your life task. I found myself, when I was in a crucible, as the senior minister of First Covenant Church in Minneapolis. And again, that church rebirthed. We had about 50 people. It grew up to be about 800 people, with about 200 people in average worship on Sunday mornings. And over several years, while the church rebirthed, it included LGBTQ members, individuals, families, architects, judges, folks who wanted to be included in this unique journey of rebirth in downtown Minneapolis. And over several years, the church and its larger denomination became embroiled in conflict over the human rights and dignity of LGBTQ people. Eventually, the ultimatum came: exclude or be excluded. I went through a formal religious trial. And in the end, both our congregation and I were excommunicated from the denomination because we would not treat the LGBTQ people as anything less than human and equal and fully welcomed. I'm a straight, white, cisgendered, able-bodied male, and my intellectual thread, my life task, could do nothing more than to bear witness to the humanity and dignity of people who counted on me to stand with them. That experience was excruciating, and it cost us so much. But it also clarified what leadership is. Leadership is alignment between values and action, especially when the cost is real. So these are my parting words, friends, as I wrap. Cross-sector leadership values breadth, but it depends on depth. And I encourage you, as you look to your life, do people know more about you than just where you work? Do others know what you care about? And is your vision for seeing Duluth grow based on more than just your job, but how you see the collective? Here's the final questions and answers that relate to these 6 characteristics. If you're in a space, either unwittingly or invited, why am I here? It's because I can bring balanced motivations. What can I do? I can offer transferable skills. How should I act here? With careful contextual intelligence. Who can I move with alongside others with integrated networks? How do I stay steady with a prepared mind? And finally, what anchors my credibility? The heart, soul, and mind of intellectual thread. Cross-sector leader isn't about knowing everything, it's about showing up with the right motivations, usable skills, contextual judgment, trusted relationships, and an open mind, and a coherent life task. I wish you all the very best in your personal journey of business and civic leadership. Thank you.